I would describe it as, sort of multifaceted, and one that was to some degree quite confusing in terms of the communication and the information that was shared, and that was sort of causing a lot of distrust. To be honest, I think in various spaces, both online and offline, and in the more mainstream media. So it was an interesting landscape to view and to see what was happening, and there was certainly a lot happening.
Indeed. Now, we have observed an increase in the usage of social media, as an important tool for political communication and messaging, especially during the last electoral process. Now, according to your observation, Mr. Links, how was social media embraced by politicians and political parties during this process?
Well, actually, that's the funny and interesting side of all of this, is that the political parties weren't actually using social media all that effectively. If you look at their presence, and this goes out, cuts across all political parties, from the ruling party right through to the smallest parties, and many of them didn't have a presence to speak of. There wasn't much happening in terms of electioneering, especially amongst the more smaller parties, where there was basically nothing happening, and many of them don't even have social media pages, to be honest. So it is a strange thing. Now, while this was busy happening, or not happening, let's say it wasn't happening in terms of the campaigning and electioneering online, on social media specifically. A lot of the public discussion was happening online. So I think to a large degree, a lot of the political parties missed the boat on social media. And it's the same that happened in 2019. We made the same observation in 2019, where it seemed like the social media hasn't really become the stage yet for our political parties. And it was the same last year. If you look at the followings that the bigger parties, for instance, have on social media, and the way they were communicating or not communicating, to be more accurate, and how they used their social media profiles and pages, it was clear that this wasn't the priority area of campaigning. And I think to a large extent, it didn't really impact, their turnouts, because a lot of people had already made up their minds. And so it was, I think to a large degree, more your face-to-face and physical platforms that played a bigger role, rather than social media for many of these parties. So, I think it's still something that is going to happen in future, where social media becomes a primary platform for campaigning for political parties. But that's down the line. At the moment, we certainly aren't seeing that.
And in terms of, there were also instances of information manipulation tactics and methods used by various political actors. What are some of the most visible and prominent tactics used during election information manipulation campaigns from your point of view?
Yeah. I think what we saw from early on in 2024 was the disinformation campaigns, the political disinformation campaigns that targeted various aspects on the political landscape. For instance, smear campaigns against various parties and their candidates. We saw that quite prominently throughout the election year. We saw attempts to cast doubt on the integrity of the elections themselves, by creating narratives around the Electoral Commission of Namibia. But you have to understand that to a large extent, for instance, what happened around the Electoral Commission, to a large extent that was due to the actions of the Commission itself. And then, the disinformation actors would just use the missteps of the Commission to wrap, falsehoods and all sorts of lies around that, and then, cast it out there into the social media ocean and see how it floats. So, that was busy happening. So there was a lot happening. And I think it was causing quite a bit of confusion from how we were seeing people engaging with some of this content online. It certainly was a landscape that was polluted, to put it that way, polluted with mis and disinformation, election-related mis and disinformation.
You mentioned about election-related mis and disinformation, and then we are also talking about, which ties in very well with information manipulation. Now, how best can we describe it, and how can we actually avoid information manipulation?
Well, I think if you look at the report that we released earlier this year, I think what we are proposing at the IPPR through our Namibia Fact Check project is, a whole of society approach to media information literacy, which means we have to find a way to educate our people on what's happening and what to avoid, what to be on the lookout for, how to recognize what they are looking at or what they are confronted with,
right,
when it comes to online mis and disinformation. And to be more critical of what they are seeing, and hearing. A lot of voice notes on WhatsApp. WhatsApp is a primary space for the spread of election-related disinformation. So, for people to be more critical and teaching people how to be more critical, and that's why we need sort of a whole of a society approach to media information and digital literacy, so that people understand how they can themselves deal with this and not fall prey to this type of information campaign.
There is also what is called narrative laundering. How is this tactic actually used, and what possible outcome does it carry with it? Narrative
laundering is a specific manipulation tactic where, a narrative is created that is informed by various various approaches where, a consistent narrative of a candidate, for instance, an individual, is created, that the person is untrustworthy, that the person is unwell or unfit. I think this was the narrative campaign that comes. There are two narrative campaigns, I think, that were consistent throughout 2024. One was from early on aimed at casting the IPC leader, Panduleni Tula, as a British agent, and the IPC as a security threat. So there was this narrative campaign that was running throughout the election year. And the other very prominent narrative campaign that we saw was, casting doubt on the health and fitness of the current president, Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah, where there was this ongoing narrative about her being not well, being unhealthy, and that she collapsed. I think that was a major element in this campaign, was a supposed collapse, an unproven collapse, at the end of, sort of nearing the end of the electoral campaign period, as we were coming into October November last year, ahead of the election. There was this narrative of her having collapsed, and not just once but twice at ruling party campaign rallies. And so this was part of this campaign to say that she is actually too old and that she is not healthy and so on. So these were the prominent narrative campaigns that we saw play out as the elections neared. And in some respects, they were quite sophisticated. But I think ultimately they were still not sophisticated enough to fool a plurality of Namibians voters. So, you know, but it was interesting watching this play out throughout the election year, and seeing this tactic being used the way it was, and sort of trying to, you know, get a sense of the actors behind these campaigns. It really was interesting.
Just finally, before we wrap up the interview, Mr. Links, partisans had various media platforms at their disposal. Which platforms do you think were favored as these disinformation actors, or by these disinformation actors?
I think, we sort of got a sense that WhatsApp was a primary channel for spreading all sorts of political information, you know, whether it was false or whether it was campaign material or so on. But I think WhatsApp was a primary channel when we're talking about sort of online channels,
right,
or internet-connected channels or so on. But it didn't really get the sense, as I said earlier, that the more mainstream open channels, the Facebooks and the X's and Instagrams and the like, you know, there was a lot of campaign sloganeering and imagery of rallies and so on these other platforms, but the actual sort of messaging, I think, was happening more in WhatsApp spaces. Aside from sort of the face-to-face on the ground, I think engagements that I think played a critical role for a lot of the political parties. But yeah, I think the other challenge that we saw emerging, the issue we saw emerging was sort of the use of AI-generated content on you know, to push some of these disinformation, election-related disinformation campaigns, which is concerning. And it was clear that, you know, the actors behind these content items were experimenting, and it's clear that they're going to get better at it. And that's going to be a problem for us going forward. If you know, realistic AI-generated content becomes proliferating on our electoral landscape, on our politics, and it just totally causes confusion. It could become a problem for democracy as a whole if people don't know what is real anymore, and you know, start believing everything is false and AI generated and it's all lies. That could be a big problem for us going forward, not just in terms of elections, but in terms of our politics in general, and you know, the integrity of our governance systems. So this is something that we have to watch going forward, because I think this is where a major threat lurks for on our electoral landscape and in our politics in general.